Hi, my name is Gloria, and last month I learned just how small your own family can make you feel, even when you're standing in a room full of strangers. It didn't happen during an argument behind closed doors. It didn't happen in some heated family meeting. It happened in public, under bright lights with people watching. They laughed, they dismissed me, and they treated me like I didn't belong. I stood there with a brochure in my hands, my own sister shoving it at me like I was staff, like I was supposed to hand it out to guests. Everyone laughed at her little joke, and I stood frozen, my smile glued on my face, but my heart burning. But what they didn't know, what none of them expected, was that the moment they tried to erase me was the same moment I finally found the courage to step out of the shadows. I grew up as the second daughter, the quiet one, the dependable one. My younger sister Lorraine was the star of the show. She always had the spotlight, and my parents made sure it stayed that way. Whenever she walked into a room, the energy shifted. People turned their heads. She spoke. They listened. And me? I was the steady background. Good grades, steady job, never in trouble. The one who made sure the bills got paid, the groceries got bought, the details nobody noticed were taken care of. I wasn't the star, but I was the stage everything else stood on. For years, I convinced myself that being reliable was enough, that maybe invisibility was safer than disappointment, that if I just kept the peace, eventually someone would notice how much I carried. But if I'm being honest, the truth is painful. In my family, usefulness was never the same as value. The invitation came on a Wednesday afternoon. My mother's voice sounded casual on the phone, like she was asking me to pick up a carton of milk. "Gloria," she said, "Lorraine is attending a special jewelry showcase downtown this Saturday. Why don't you come with us? It could be fun." Her tone wasn't really asking. It was more like a soft command wrapped in the illusion of choice. And because I was still clinging to the scraps of what family was supposed to mean, I said yes. I told myself maybe it would be different this time. Maybe this would be the moment they saw me. Not as the helper, not as the quiet sister, not as the afterthought, but as myself. But I should have known better. Saturday came. The day was gray and cool, the kind of weather that makes you reach for an old sweater. I parked 2 blocks from the event and walked toward the glass doors of the Chicago Art Center, where the showcase was being held. Lorraine was already there, standing with her back perfectly straight, her gold scarf catching the light as if she'd rehearsed the entrance. Mother hovered at her side, adjusting the sleeve of Lorraine's silk blouse, like she was fine-tuning a masterpiece. My father stood tall, shaking hands with the event organizer, his voice confident and smooth, as if he belonged there more than anyone else. And me? I wore a navy dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago with simple flats and a cardigan. Nothing fancy. I wasn't there to impress anyone, or so I told myself. But the truth is, even as I adjusted the strap of my handbag, I felt the cold air of comparison sink into my skin. The moment we walked inside, the difference was obvious. Lorraine glided from display to display, her laughter ringing like bells. Sales associates hurried toward her with champagne glasses and polished words. My parents followed, proud shadows of their golden child. And I trailed behind like a stranger who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong event. I tried to keep my head up to show that I belonged too. I admired a delicate silver necklace in one corner, its design understated, timeless. It reminded me of who I was. Quiet, subtle, but strong. That's when Lorraine appeared beside me, her lips curved in a smile that was meant for the crowd, not for me. She pressed a glossy brochure into my hand. "Here," she said lightly. "Why don't you hold this? Stand near the entrance. You almost look like staff already." And she laughed, loud enough for the people around us to hear. The couple standing nearby chuckled politely. My father smirked. My mother gave a little wave of her hand as if to say, "Oh, Lorraine, you're too much." And I I stood there with that brochure in my hand, heavy, heavier than it should have been. I wanted to speak, to throw it back at her, to demand why my own family found it so easy to cut me down for sport. But the words didn't come. They never do when you need them most. Instead, I turned slightly, pretending to study the nearest painting, while the laughter behind me settled into the air like smoke. You know, there are moments in life when silence feels like weakness, but standing there, brochure pressed against my palm, I began to wonder if silence could be something else entirely, not surrender, not defeat, but the beginning of something stronger. As I slipped toward the side hallway out of the circle of lights and whispers, I realized I wasn't just walking away from a showcase. I was walking away from years of being the invisible daughter, the useful one, the placeholder. And though they didn't know it yet, something inside me had shifted. That was just the beginning. What came next? Well, that was the moment everything changed. I found myself near the back of the gallery, away from the clinking glasses and the carefully polished smiles. The walls were lined with portraits of women, painted decades ago, their eyes filled with untold stories. I stood there quietly, almost grateful for their company. At least they didn't judge me. At least they didn't laugh. But the voices from the main hall carried easily. Lorraine's laugh floated through like a bell ringing too often. My mother's approval followed close behind, and my father's deep voice, steady and commanding, boomed as if he owned the building. Every sentence, every sound felt like a reminder. I was not the daughter they chose to showcase. A few minutes later, Lorraine spotted me across the room. She walked over slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. In her hand, she held a crystal glass of champagne, bubbles rising in steady streams. "Oh, Gloria," she said sweetly, her voice dipped in honey but edged with steel. She handed me the glass. "Since you're just standing here, would you mind holding this for a moment?" I need both hands free to talk with the curator. Before I could answer, she pressed the glass into my hand and turned away, her laughter already blending back into the crowd. I stood frozen again, staring at the bubbles in that glass, realizing I wasn't even considered worthy of drinking it, just holding it. A couple near me glanced, smiled politely, then whispered to each other as they walked past. One of them murmured, "She must be part of the staff." Something inside me cracked, just slightly. I placed the champagne on a nearby table, carefully, as if it might explode. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of years of being the helpful one, years of being the safe choice, the reliable shadow. I thought of birthdays where Lorraine received diamond earrings while I got a sweater, practical for work. I thought of dinners where she was toasted for her ambition while I was thanked for doing the dishes. And now, here I was, literally mistaken for the hired help in front of strangers. I wanted to leave. I should have left. But something held me there. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the small, stubborn voice inside whispering, "Stay. Watch. Remember every word, every glance. Don't let them erase you without witness." So I stayed. From my corner, I saw my mother approach a well-dressed couple near the main display case. She was animated, laughing, pointing toward Lorraine as if presenting a work of art. "Our Lorraine has such an eye for these things," she said proudly, always so stylish, so full of presence. She was born to shine, and then, as if on cue, her gaze flicked toward me, just briefly, and she added, "Not like Gloria. She's more simple. Quiet. Some women just don't care to stand out, I suppose." The couple nodded, smiling politely, but the words landed like stones in my chest. She didn't whisper them. She didn't lower her voice. She wanted me to hear. I turned toward a nearby glass case, pretending to admire the jewelry inside. A row of sapphire rings sparkled under the lights. They looked cold, almost harsh, reflecting fragments of my face. In that reflection, I didn't see glamour or wealth. I saw exhaustion, I saw a woman carrying silent debts, debts no one in that room would ever acknowledge. Because 3 years ago, when Lorraine's boutique nearly collapsed under unpaid bills, I was the one who transferred $5,000 into her account at midnight, no questions asked. Because when my parents couldn't cover Lorraine's graduate tuition one summer, I quietly co-signed the loan so she could keep her scholarship. Because every time they praised her brilliance, they forgot whose shoulders she'd quietly stood on. None of that existed here. Not in their words, not in their smiles. As I stood there, lost in the shine of sapphires and unspoken memories, a voice startled me. "Excuse me, ma'am," a young attendant said gently. "Would you mind stepping back a little? That case is reserved for private viewings." For a second, I didn't understand. Then I realized he thought I was lingering too close, that maybe I wasn't supposed to be there at all. I swallowed hard and nodded, stepping back quietly. He smiled politely, but his eyes slid past me like I wasn't worth holding on to. The humiliation built layer upon layer. First the brochure, then the champagne glass, then my mother's words. Now a stranger asking me to step away as if I didn't belong. It was all too familiar, too rehearsed. The script of my life replaying again and again. But here's the thing. When you hear the same story enough times, something inside you starts to rebel. You begin to wonder if maybe it's not your role that's wrong. It's the script itself. And I felt that rebellion stirring, hot and quiet under my skin. I slipped out to the side entrance, just for a breath of fresh air. The evening air was cooler now, tinged with the scent of rain on pavement. I leaned against the stone wall, wrapping my cardigan tighter around me. For the first time all day, I let the tears prick my eyes. I didn't let them fall, but I let myself feel them. "This is the last time," I whispered. "The last time I let them decide who I am." I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I had the strength to prove it. But something had shifted. And then, just as I steadied myself, I heard the low hum of an engine approaching. Not loud, not showy, just steady. Certain commanding attention without asking for it. I didn't turn right away. I let the sound roll over me, calm and sure. Because somehow I already knew. The story wasn't over. The steady hum grew louder, smooth as velvet. Even before the headlights curved into view, I knew this wasn't just another guest arriving. The energy outside shifted. The valet staff straightened. Conversations paused. Heads turned down the sidewalk. And then it appeared. A silver Mercedes S-Class gliding to a stop at the curb, polished so clean it mirrored the evening sky. It didn't roar. It didn't need to. The car carried the kind of presence that spoke without words. Calm, confident, undeniable. The driver's door opened and there he was. Michael, my husband, my anchor. He stepped out, tailored suit catching the low light, his stride steady and unhurried. There was no grand entrance, no performance. Just a man who knew who he was, and more importantly, who knew who I was. I didn't move at first. I stayed leaning against the stone wall, my cardigan wrapped tight, my heart caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. Michael spotted me instantly. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply walked toward me with that quiet certainty I'd fallen in love with years ago. When he reached me, he slipped his jacket from his shoulders and draped it gently around mine. His voice was low, meant only for me. "Cold out here," he murmured. I swallowed hard, nodding. My throat was too tight for words. Inside the glass doors, I caught the movement, the shift of eyes, the frozen expressions. Lorraine standing mid-laugh, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. My mother, stiffening, confusion clouding her face. My father already scanning Michael up and down, calculating, assessing. They weren't used to seeing me this way, seen, chosen, cared for. Michael didn't glance at them. He didn't need to. His presence alone redrew the scene. He turned to me, his eyes steady. Ready to head inside together? Together. That one word felt like a shield. I nodded slowly. My hand slipped into his, the warmth of his grip steadying the storm inside me. And so we walked back through the glass doors. Not as the quiet daughter trailing behind, not as the shadow carrying brochures and glasses, but as myself, Gloria, with someone by my side who refused to let me disappear. The room seemed to still as we entered. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed. Lorraine's smile twitched, the edges sharp and cracking. She tried to recover, lifting her chin. "Oh, Michael," she said brightly, as though she'd expected him all along. "Didn't realize you'd be joining us tonight?" Michael's voice was calm, polite, but cool. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." And then, without hesitation, he turned his full attention back to me. Not to the jewelry, not to my parents, not to the room, to me. It was such a small gesture. But in a family where I'd spent a lifetime invisible, that small gesture thundered louder than anything else. I caught Lorraine's reflection in a mirrored case. Her hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles pale. My mother leaned closer to her, whispering something sharp. My father's jaw flexed, a tic I knew well, his tell when control was slipping. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of their reactions. They were. Michael guided me toward one of the displays, his hand light at my back. "Which one do you like?" he asked softly. The question startled me. No one had ever asked that before, not here, not in front of them. I looked at the cases, at the sparkling rings and necklaces. But the truth was, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the question was mine to answer. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I'll let you know." He smiled as though that answer was perfect, and in that moment I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. Behind us, Lorraine tried to reclaim the stage. She laughed too loudly, gesturing toward another display, pulling a salesman into her orbit. My parents nodded eagerly, clinging to her performance like lifeboats. But the attention in the room had already changed course. People glanced at me now, not because of the jewelry, not because of Lorraine's chatter, but because of the quiet dignity of being seen. I realized something then. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove. My worth had never been theirs to measure. Michael squeezed my hand gently as though he knew what I was thinking. "You don't have to prove anything here," he whispered. And just like that, the heaviness I'd carried all evening, the brochure, the champagne, my mother's words, lifted, not gone forever, but lighter. Because finally I understood. Their laughter didn't define me. My silence didn't erase me. I was standing tall, and for the first time, they had to see it. The rest of the evening passed in fragments. Lorraine fluttered from case to case, her laughter sharper now, brittle, like glass about to crack. My parents followed close, praising her taste, her charm, her future. It was the same script they had rehearsed for years. But something was different this time. Not in them, in me. I no longer felt the need to chase their approval. I no longer felt the sting of being left out, because I wasn't left out at all, not anymore. Michael stayed near me, his presence quiet but grounding. He didn't hover. He didn't perform. He simply existed beside me, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that simplicity, I felt stronger than I ever had before. I wandered through the gallery at my own pace. For once, I wasn't rushing to keep up, to prove I belonged. I paused at the paintings, studied the brushstrokes, admired the jewelry without the weight of comparison pressing down on me. Everywhere I went, Michael walked with me. Not leading, not pushing, just walking with me, side by side. At one point, I passed the same young attendant who had earlier asked me to step back from a case. His eyes widened in recognition. He straightened quickly, offering me a small nod of respect this time. It wasn't much, just a glance. But it was enough to make me realize something. When you carry yourself differently, the world responds differently. And I was carrying myself differently now. Near the center of the room, Lorraine's voice rose above the hum of conversation. "This piece would look perfect for my next brand campaign," she declared, posing beside a diamond-studded necklace. Cameras clicked, a few acquaintances gathered. For years, that moment would have cut me down, made me feel smaller, invisible. But not tonight. I simply turned back to the sapphire ring I had been studying. It was quiet, understated, beautiful without demanding attention, much like me. And I smiled, not because I had won anything, but because I finally understood I didn't need to compete at all. Later, as the showcase wound down, my parents approached Michael and me. Their smiles were tight, their voices careful. "So good of you to come," my father said stiffly. "We didn't realize." His words trailed off, as if finishing them would cost too much. My mother added quickly, "Yes, of course. It's nice when you can support family, isn't it?" I looked at them, really looked, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. The kind of distance you feel when you've stepped into a different chapter and you realize the old one no longer fits. I didn't need their praise anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't even need their apologies. Because peace doesn't come from people finally recognizing your worth. Peace comes from recognizing it yourself. As we left the gallery, the night air was cool and gentle. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed deeply, without heaviness, without expectation. Michael opened the car door for me just as he always did. But this time, as I slid into the seat, I felt different. Stronger, calmer, whole. On the drive home, neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or erased. It was the silence of peace. The next morning, I woke to a quiet house. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, warming the pages of a book I'd left open the night before. My phone buzzed with new messages, family group chat notifications, Lorraine's latest posts, a few comments from mutual friends. For once, I didn't rush to open them. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the steam curl upward. For years, I thought closure meant hearing, "I'm sorry." But now I understood. Closure isn't about their timing. It's about mine. That day, I deleted the family group thread. Not in anger, not in spite, but in clarity. I didn't need to catalog every slight, every empty holiday greeting, every forced photo. I didn't need to keep scrolling through a history where I was always the shadow. I was done carrying it. And as the messages vanished, I felt lighter. Not lonely, not bitter, just free. I looked around my home, the framed photos of moments I chose, the little garden I tended out back, the life I built with Michael. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was real. It was mine. And that was enough. Sometimes family drama ends with fireworks, with shouting, with grand scenes. But sometimes the quietest ending is the most powerful. Because silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is proof. Proof that you've outgrown the noise. Proof that you no longer need a seat at a table that never wanted you there. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee, sunlight warming my shoulders, I realized I hadn't lost a family. I had finally found myself. The days that followed felt different. Not louder, not grander, just calmer. The quiet in my home wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, but the silence of finally being free. I tended my little garden in the mornings, hands brushing over lavender and rosemary, herbs I'd planted months ago that now grew strong without anyone watching. I brewed tea and let the steam rise around me. No phone buzzing, no demands pulling me into shadows I didn't belong in. For once, life wasn't about what they saw. It was about what I felt. Looking back, it's almost strange how much power I once gave away. For years, I let their opinions shape the mirror I saw myself in. If they called me plain, I believed it. If they laughed at me, I carried the shame. If they overlooked me, I assumed I wasn't worth looking at. But the truth? Their blindness never defined me. Sometimes families confuse usefulness with value. They mistake silence for weakness. And they forget that the quiet one, the one holding everything together, can also be the strongest. I had been strong all along. I just didn't realize it until that night. When Michael placed his jacket over my shoulders and stood beside me, it wasn't about wealth or cars or appearances. It was about being seen, truly seen by someone who never asked me to be louder, prettier, flashier, or different. He reminded me that value isn't proven, it's lived. And once I embraced that, I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped waiting for invitations. I stopped waiting for recognition that was never coming. I chose peace instead. Maybe you've felt something similar. Maybe you've been the sibling in the shadows, the child no one bragged about, the relative whose contributions were always expected but never celebrated. If so, I want you to hear this. You are not invisible. You never were. Your worth doesn't depend on their applause. It doesn't vanish because they refuse to see it. And it doesn't need to be proven through noise or spectacle. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand tall in silence and let your life, not their judgment, speak for you. I know many of you watching this are over 40, maybe 50, maybe more. By now, you've lived enough life to know that family can be complicated. Some of us spend decades trying to earn love that comes easily to others. Some of us bend until we break, hoping one day someone will notice the sacrifices we've made. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to wait anymore. You can step out of that old story right now. You can choose peace over permission. You can build a life that reflects your worth, not their doubts. It won't always be easy. It won't always be tidy, but it will be yours. As I sit here now, sipping coffee and watching the world outside my window, I feel something I used to think was impossible: contentment. Not because my family changed, they didn't. Not because they finally apologized, they haven't. But because I changed. And that, in the end, is what truly matters. So if you've ever been made to feel small by the very people who should have lifted you up, I want you to ask yourself, what if you stopped waiting? What if you stopped proving? What if, starting today, you chose peace over permission? Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever outgrown people, even family, who made you feel invisible? Have you ever discovered strength in silence instead of noise? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight, because the truth is, we're not as alone as we think. And sometimes, just knowing that someone else understands can make the burden lighter. And remember this, if nothing else, you don't have to prove your worth. You already have it. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story. So, what have we learned? That true worth isn't measured by applause or by the roles our families assign us. It's measured by how we choose to stand tall, even in silence. I carried the weight of being overlooked for years, but I've learned peace comes when we stop waiting for recognition and start honoring ourselves. If you've ever felt invisible, remember this: you already matter, just as you are. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the message. And always remember, your love, your truth, your place are worth defending.